In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where alien civilizations trade in power and dominance, there exists an ancient truth that most species have forgotten: sometimes the greatest strength lies not in conquest, but in compassion. When Marcus Chen, a human mechanic working in the grimy underbelly of Nexus Station, encounters a defective dragon being sold for scraps, he makes a choice that will shake the very foundations of galactic society. What happens when a species known for their stubborn kindness meets a creature that the universe has deemed worthless? What occurs when genuine respect is shown to something that has only known chains and exploitation? In a cosmos where might makes right, one simple act of kneeling instead of commanding will unleash consequences that neither human nor dragon could have imagined. This is the story of how 3 credits changed everything. The stench of alien sweat and desperation filled the cramped corridors of Nexus Station's lower levels. Marcus Chen wiped his oil-stained hands on his coveralls and squinted through the dim lighting at the chaos surrounding him. The station's weekly creature market was in full swing, with beings from dozens of species haggling over exotic pets, work animals, and combat beasts. Marcus wasn't here by choice. His workshop's environmental scrubber had broken down again, and he needed a cheap biofilter organism to keep the air breathable while he worked on starship engines. The legitimate dealers on the upper levels charged prices that would eat through his meager savings, so here he was, picking through the dregs of the galaxy's biological trade. A Vorthan merchant with scales that shifted from green to purple caught his attention, not because of the creature he was selling, but because of how badly he wanted to get rid of it. The alien's 4 arms gestured frantically as he spoke to potential buyers, his voice carrying the unmistakable desperation of someone trying to cut his losses. 3 credits, the Vorthan called out in heavily accented standard. Only 3 credits for genuine Draknari specimen. Weak, yes, but still dragon bloodline. Perfect for atmospheric processing or simple labor. Marcus pushed through the crowd to get a better look. In a reinforced cage barely large enough for the creature to lie down, he saw something that made his heart sink. The dragon was small for its species, probably no bigger than a large dog, with dull silver scales that should have gleamed like polished metal. Its wings were folded tight against its body, and its head hung low in defeat. But what struck Marcus most were its eyes, deep amber pools that held an intelligence and sadness that reminded him uncomfortably of his own reflection on bad days. "What's wrong with it?" asked a burly Krell, his tusks yellowed with age. The reptilian alien examined the dragon with the clinical detachment of someone evaluating livestock. The Vorthan's scales flushed darker. "Nothing wrong. Simply small variant. Draknari are known for size and fire production, yes? This one produces minimal flame, limited flight capability. But still useful. Still dragon." The Krell snorted, a sound like steam escaping from a pressure valve. "Weak dragons bring bad fortune. Why would anyone pay even 1 credit for defective goods?" As the potential buyer walked away, Marcus noticed the dragon's reaction. Its head lifted slightly, and those amber eyes tracked the retreating figure with what looked almost like relief. This wasn't an animal that wanted to be owned by someone who saw it as defective goods. "You there, human?" The Vorthan had spotted Marcus lingering nearby. "You understand quality when you see it, yes? This dragon, perfect for human sensibilities. Your species appreciates unique specimens." Marcus stepped closer to the cage, his trained eye taking in details that the other potential buyers had missed. The dragon's breathing was steady and controlled, not labored. Its scales, while dull, showed no signs of disease or malnutrition. Most telling of all, when Marcus knelt down to get eye level with the creature, it didn't cower or bare its teeth. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, studying him with the same curiosity he was showing it. "How long have you had him?" Marcus asked. 3 cycles, the Vorthan replied quickly, then seemed to realize that might sound bad. "Acquired from reputable breeder on Drachnos Prime. Papers all in order. Simply wrong size for buyer's specifications." Marcus could read between the lines. Someone had ordered a war dragon or a status symbol and received the smaller, gentler creature instead. Rather than return it and lose money, they'd sold it to a trader who was now stuck with merchandise he couldn't move. The dragon's eyes never left Marcus's face as he continued his examination. There was something unsettling about that steady gaze, as if the creature was evaluating him just as carefully as he was evaluating it. Marcus had worked with enough alien species to recognize intelligence when he saw it, and this dragon was far smarter than the Vorthan was letting on.
Can it understand Standard? Marcus asked. All Draknari have language centers, the merchant replied dismissively. But this one very quiet. Never speaks.
Maybe vocal cords underdeveloped. Marcus noticed the slight twitch in the dragon's expression at that statement. He filed that observation away and made his decision. I'll take him. The Vorthan's scales brightened immediately.
Excellent choice. 50 credits, very reasonable for genuine dragon bloodline.
You just offered him for 3 credits, Marcus pointed out calmly.
To anyone who would listen. The merchant's scales darkened again. Ah, but you show true interest. Surely worth premium for discriminating buyer?
Marcus stood up, brushing dust from his knees.
3 credits. That's what you were asking, that's what I'm offering.
After a brief attempt at negotiation that fooled no one, the Vorthan accepted Marcus's payment with poorly concealed relief. As credits changed hands, Marcus couldn't help but notice the dragon's reaction. Those amber eyes had widened slightly, and, for the first time since he'd been watching, the creature's posture had straightened. The transfer of ownership was handled with typical market efficiency. The Vorthan provided a basic datapad with the dragon's supposed specifications and care requirements, most of which Marcus suspected were generic templates rather than specific to this individual. A standard ownership chip was coded with Marcus's identity and implanted just under the dragon's left shoulder scale, a procedure the creature endured with stoic silence. Pleasure doing business, the Vorthan said, already turning to hawk his remaining wares. You want travel cage, only 15 credits additional. Marcus looked at the reinforced cage that had barely contained the dragon and shook his head. I think we'll manage without it. This caused something of a stir among the nearby vendors and customers. Dragons, even small ones, were dangerous creatures. Their fire breath could melt through standard materials, their claws could rend metal, and their intelligence made them notoriously difficult to control without proper restraints. Marcus approached the cage and began working on the locking mechanism. It was a standard biolock, keyed to recognize the dragon's new owner. As the mechanism clicked open, conversations around them died down. Several beings stepped back, giving the cage a wider berth. The dragon didn't move. Marcus opened the cage door fully and took a step back. Come on out, he said quietly. You're free to go. The amber eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made Marcus feel like he was being X-rayed. The dragon remained motionless for several long seconds, then, slowly, carefully, began to emerge from the cage. Its movements were deliberate and controlled, showing none of the explosive aggression that most people expected from a released dragon. Once fully outside the cage, the dragon sat back on its haunches and continued to study Marcus. Its head was cocked to one side in a gesture that reminded Marcus of a curious dog, if dogs had scales and could breathe fire. Well, Marcus said, uncomfortably aware that dozens of beings were watching this interaction. I guess we should head back to my workshop. He turned and began walking toward the market exit, hoping he hadn't just made the most expensive mistake of his life. Behind him, he heard the soft click of claws on metal decking as the dragon followed. The journey through the station's corridors was unlike anything Marcus had experienced. Beings of all species made way for them, some with obvious fear, others with curiosity. The dragon stayed close behind Marcus, not quite at his heel like a trained pet, but clearly accompanying him by choice rather than compulsion. They passed a group of young Zephyrian traders who whispered among themselves in their musical language. Marcus caught fragments of their conversation, references to death wish and human foolishness. He tried to ignore them, but couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps they had a point. As they entered a lift tube that would take them to the station's industrial sector, Marcus finally spoke to his new companion. I should probably give you a name, he said, watching the dragon's reflection in the polished lift walls. Can't keep calling you the dragon. The creature's head turned toward him, ears pricked forward in apparent attention. How about Ember? Simple, fits the dragon theme. There was no obvious reaction, but Marcus thought he detected a slight downturn in the dragon's posture. He tried again. Spark? Again, no enthusiasm.
Okay, maybe something not fire-related.
Marcus rubbed his chin thoughtfully.
What about
Sage? You seem pretty wise for someone who was going for 3 credits.
This time the reaction was unmistakable.
The dragon's head lifted, and those amber eyes met his directly. The creature made a soft sound, not quite a purr, not quite a rumble, but definitely approving.
Sage it is, Marcus said, feeling oddly pleased by this small interaction.
The lift reached Marcus's workshop level, and they stepped out into a corridor lined with industrial spaces. The air here was thick with the smell of machine oil, ozone from welding torches, and the unique metallic tang that seemed to permeate all starship maintenance areas. Marcus's workshop occupied a double-wide bay that had seen better decades. The walls were lined with tool racks, spare parts bins, and diagnostic equipment that ranged from cutting-edge to ancient. 3 starship engines in various states of repair dominated the central workspace, their access panels open like mechanical patients awaiting surgery.
Home sweet home, Marcus said, palming the lock on his workshop door.
It's not much, but the rent's cheap and the neighbors mostly mind their own business. As the door slid open, he was hit by the familiar smell of his workspace, tinged with the acrid note that meant his air scrubber was definitely on its last legs.
He made a mental note to see about getting that fixed sooner rather than later. Sage followed him into the workshop, amber eyes taking in every detail.
The dragon moved with careful precision, avoiding the scattered tools and parts that cluttered the floor. When it reached the center of the space, it sat down again and continued its patient observation. Marcus sealed the door behind them and leaned against it, suddenly aware of what he'd just done.
He'd brought a dragon, even a small one, into his personal workspace.
If Sage decided to go wild, there was nowhere to run and limited options for defense. But, as he watched the dragon methodically examine its new surroundings, Marcus felt his anxiety begin to fade.
There was nothing threatening about Sage's behavior.
If anything, the creature seemed as uncertain about the situation as Marcus was. I suppose you're hungry, Marcus said, realizing he had no idea what dragons ate. The care guide the Vorthan had provided was generic to the point of uselessness.
Let me see what I've got in the way of food.
His personal supplies were limited to basic human rations and a few alien delicacies he'd picked up in trades. Nothing seemed appropriate for a dragon, no matter how small. Sage made that soft rumbling sound again, drawing Marcus's attention. The dragon had moved to one of the engines and was examining it with obvious interest.
As Marcus watched, Sage extended one claw and carefully traced the outline of a corroded power coupling. You know something about engines?
Marcus asked, more to break the silence than because he expected an answer. To his complete surprise, Sage looked back at him and nodded once, deliberately.
Marcus stared. Did you just? Another nod.
Well, Marcus said, sitting down heavily on his work stool.
This is either going to be the best decision I've ever made, or the one that finally gets me killed. Sage's expression, if a dragon could be said to have expressions, seemed almost amused.
The creature settled down on the workshop floor, curled its tail around its feet, and closed its eyes. Within moments, it was breathing with the steady rhythm of sleep. Marcus watched his new companion for a long time, wondering what exactly he'd gotten himself into. 3 credits had seemed like a bargain at the time, but he was beginning to suspect that the real cost of this decision was yet to be determined. Outside his workshop, the great station continued its endless rotation, carrying its cargo of dreams, hopes, and desperate beings toward whatever future awaited them. But, inside the cluttered space filled with broken engines and impossible possibilities, a human and a dragon had found something neither had expected. They had found each other. Marcus woke to the sound of careful movement in his workshop. For a moment, panic seized him as he remembered the dragon, but then, he registered the controlled nature of the sounds. Nothing was being smashed or torn apart. Instead, he heard the soft clink of tools being moved with precision. He rolled out of his sleeping alcove, which was little more than a converted storage closet adjacent to the main workshop, and peered into the main space. What he saw made him question whether he was still dreaming. Sage was working on the Corellian freighter engine that had been giving Marcus trouble for the past week. The dragon had somehow managed to remove the outer casing panels without damaging them, and was now delicately probing the internal components with one extended claw. Tools were arranged in neat rows nearby, organized with a precision that put Marcus's own workspace habits to shame. "Morning," Marcus said quietly, not wanting to startle the dragon. Sage looked up from the engine, gave a brief nod of acknowledgement, then returned to work. With surgical precision, the dragon extracted a burned-out power relay that Marcus had been unable to reach with conventional tools. Marcus approached slowly, fascination overcoming caution. "How did you know that was the problem?" Sage set the damaged relay aside and pointed with one claw at a diagnostic tablet that Marcus recognized as his own. The screen displayed a detailed engine schematic with the faulty component highlighted in red. Someone had run a complete diagnostic while Marcus slept. "You did this?" Marcus asked, picking up the tablet. The diagnostic was thorough, professional-grade work that would have taken him hours to complete. Another nod from Sage, followed by what sounded almost like a sigh of frustration. The dragon moved to Marcus's parts bins and began searching through them with obvious purpose. Marcus watched in amazement as Sage located the exact replacement relay needed, examined it carefully, and then began the delicate process of installation. The dragon's claws, which had seemed crude and dangerous in the market, now moved with the precision of microsurgical instruments. "Where did you learn to do this?" Marcus asked. Sage paused in the installation and looked at him with those unsettling amber eyes. For a moment, Marcus thought the dragon might actually answer. Instead, Sage made a series of gestures that seemed almost like sign language, then returned to work with visible frustration. The relay installation was completed in minutes, a job that would have taken Marcus the better part of an hour. Sage stepped back and gestured at the diagnostic tablet, which now showed green across all systems. Marcus activated the engine's test cycle, and it hummed to life with a smoothness he hadn't achieved in weeks of troubleshooting. That's incredible work. Thank you." Sage's posture straightened slightly at the thanks, a reaction that Marcus filed away for future reference. The workshop's communication system chimed, indicating an incoming message. Marcus activated the display to find Captain Torres of the merchant vessel Steady Prophet looking harried and desperate. "Chen, I need my engines back online within 6 hours or I lose my shipping contract," Torres said without preamble. "Tell me you've made progress." Marcus glanced at the now functioning Corellian engine. "Actually, Captain, I've got good news. Your engine is ready for pickup." Torres's expression shifted from worry to suspicion. "Ready? You said it would take another 3 days minimum." "I had some help," Marcus said, unconsciously glancing at Sage. "When can you send your crew to collect it?" After finalizing the pickup arrangements, Marcus turned back to find Sage examining another of the engines in his workshop, this one a military-grade Altarian drive core that had been giving him headaches for weeks. "Don't suppose you know anything about Altarian tech?" Marcus asked hopefully. Sage's head tilted in that curious gesture, then the dragon approached the engine and began another of those precise diagnostic examinations. Within minutes, Sage had identified 3 separate issues that Marcus had missed entirely. By the time Captain Torres's crew arrived to collect their engine, word had somehow spread through the station's engineering community that Marcus had acquired a diagnostic specialist. His comm system chimed repeatedly with requests for consultations and repair work. "Business is picking up," Marcus said to Sage as they watched the Corellian engine being loaded onto a transport sled. "At this rate, I might actually be able to afford decent food for both of us." Sage made that soft rumbling sound that Marcus was beginning to recognize as approval. The next few days fell into a routine that surprised Marcus with its comfortable efficiency. Sage proved to be not just technically skilled, but also incredibly organized. Tools were always where Marcus needed them, diagnostic reports were thorough and accurate, and complex repairs that should have taken weeks were completed in days. But it wasn't just the technical assistance that Marcus found valuable. Sage seemed to understand the social dynamics of the engineering trade in ways that Marcus had never mastered. When difficult customers arrived, Sage would position himself where his dragon heritage was clearly visible, lending an air of exotic competence to Marcus's workshop. When fellow mechanics stopped by to gossip or trade favors, Sage would make himself scarce, somehow understanding that his presence might complicate professional relationships. It was during one of these social visits that Marcus first encountered real trouble. Grix Thornscale, a Vorthan engineer who ran a competing workshop 3 levels up, arrived with 2 hulking Krell enforcers in tow. Marcus had been expecting this visit since word of his improved productivity had spread. Chen, Grix said, his scales shifting through agitated patterns of color.
We need to discuss your recent acquisitions.
Marcus continued working on the power coupling he'd been calibrating, not looking up.
Not sure what you mean, Grix. I bought some new diagnostic equipment, nothing fancy. Do not play games with me, Grix snapped. Half the station is talking about your pet dragon. Dragons are weapons, not tools.
There are regulations about their use in commercial spaces. This was news to Marcus.
What regulations?
One of the Krell stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the workshop's main lighting. Draknari registration requires proof of adequate containment facilities and qualified handling personnel.
Violations carry significant penalties.
Marcus finally looked up from his work.
And you're telling me this because?
Because, Grix said with obvious satisfaction, I have filed a formal complaint with station authority.
They will be conducting an inspection within the hour. Marcus felt his stomach drop.
He'd never bothered to research the legal requirements for dragon ownership, assuming that if the creature market sold them, they must be legal to own. It was the kind of oversight that could cost him his business license. Of course, Grix continued, I might be willing to withdraw my complaint if you were to transfer your dragon to someone with proper facilities. I know several collectors who would pay handsomely for a trained diagnostic specialist.
The threat was clear. Sell Sage to Grix's contacts, or face legal consequences that would shut down Marcus's workshop permanently.
Marcus was about to respond when he noticed that Sage had appeared at his side with that peculiar silent movement that dragons seem to master. The dragon was studying Grix and his enforcers with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. I'll need some time to consider your offer, Marcus said carefully.
Grix's scales brightened with triumph.
Of course.
You have until the inspection is complete. I'm sure you'll make the wise choice.
After the Vorthan and his muscle left, Marcus slumped against his workbench.
Well, Sage, looks like we've got a problem. Sage approached the workshop's computer terminal and began working with the interface.
Within moments, he'd pulled up the relevant sections of station authority regulations regarding exotic creature ownership. Marcus read through the requirements with growing dismay.
Proper containment facilities, qualified handlers, regular health inspections, insurance bonds, the list went on.
The costs alone would bankrupt him, even with their recent surge in business. There's got to be a loophole, Marcus muttered, scrolling through page after page of bureaucratic language. Sage made a soft sound and pointed at a specific section of the regulations. Marcus read it twice before the implications sank in. Employment partnership, he said slowly.
If you're registered as a business partner rather than property, the containment requirements don't apply. Sage nodded emphatically. Marcus continued reading. But it requires proof that the dragon entered the partnership voluntarily and has the mental capacity to understand commercial contracts.
This was where things got complicated. Proving a dragon's intelligence was difficult enough. Proving voluntary cooperation when the creature couldn't speak was nearly impossible. Marcus looked at Sage, who was watching him with those unnaturally intelligent amber eyes.
Can you write? He asked.
Sage moved to Marcus's workbench and picked up a stylus in his claws. With careful, deliberate movements, he wrote on a diagnostic pad, I understand. Marcus stared at the words, written in standard script that was neat and legible.
How long have you been able to do that? Sage wrote again, always. Draknari are not animals.
The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If Sage could write, could read, could understand complex technical systems, then everything about the creature market, about dragon ownership, about the entire system of treating dragons as property, was fundamentally wrong. The others, Marcus said quietly.
The other dragons being sold. They're all intelligent?
Yes, Sage wrote.
But who listens to property?
Marcus sat down heavily, his mind reeling. He'd stumbled into something much larger than a simple business partnership. he discovered evidence of what amounted to systematic slavery on a galactic scale.
A chime from the workshop's door announced another visitor.
Marcus looked up to see a station authority inspector, a officious Terran woman with the kind of expression that suggested she was not looking forward to this assignment.
Mr. Chen?
I'm Inspector Walsh, Station Authority. I'm here regarding a complaint about illegal creature harboring. Marcus glanced at Sage, who had moved to stand beside the workbench where his written responses were still visible. Inspector, Marcus said, making a decision that would change everything, I think you need to see something.
Inspector Walsh entered the workshop with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to dealing with bureaucratic violations. Her scanner was already active, sweeping the space for environmental hazards and unregistered biologics.
When the device's beam passed over Sage, it emitted the sharp chirp that indicated a positive detection. Dragon, Class Draknari, unregistered for commercial use, she said, reading from her scanner's display. Mr. Chen, you're in violation of Station Code 847.3 regarding the harboring of dangerous creatures without proper containment facilities. Marcus stepped closer to his workbench, positioning himself near the diagnostic pad where Sage had written his responses. Inspector, before you write up that citation, I think you should know that this situation is more complicated than it appears. Walsh looked up from her scanner with the weary expression of someone who had heard every excuse in the book.
Mr. Chen, the regulations are quite clear. Dragons require specialized containment and qualified handlers.
This workshop is clearly not equipped for either.
What if I told you that the dragon doesn't require containment because he's here voluntarily as a business partner? Walsh's expression shifted from weary to skeptical. Business partner?
Mr. Chen, dragons are valuable creatures, but they lack the cognitive capacity for legal contracts.
You can't simply declare property to be a partner to avoid compliance requirements.
Marcus picked up the diagnostic pad and handed it to her.
Then, how do you explain this?
Walsh examined the pad, her eyebrows rising as she read Sage's careful writing. She looked from the pad to Sage, then back to the pad.
This is unusual. But handwriting can be trained.
Many performing animals learn to mimic complex behaviors without true understanding. Sage approached the inspector with that careful, deliberate movement that Marcus had learned to recognize. The dragon extended one claw toward her scanner and gently tapped the device's interface panel. Walsh nearly dropped the scanner in surprise, but recovered quickly as the device began displaying new information. Sage had somehow accessed the inspector's own database and was pulling up the relevant sections of partnership law.
How did he?
Walsh stared at her scanner as page after page of legal text scrolled past.
These are restricted access files. The security protocols alone should prevent any unauthorized interface.
Marcus watched as Sage continued to navigate through the inspector's systems with obvious familiarity.
Inspector, when was the last time you encountered a performing animal that could hack government databases?
Walsh set down her scanner and really looked at Sage for the first time. The dragon met her gaze steadily, then moved to Marcus's computer terminal and began typing on the interface. Text appeared on the main display. Inspector Walsh, Certification ID 7749 Delta, graduated from Terran Administrative Academy, class of 2387.
Specialized in xenobiology and interspecies commerce law. Currently assigned to investigate 47 cases of regulatory non-compliance this cycle.
Walsh paled as she read information that should have been confidential.
That's classified personnel data. How could you possibly know that?
Sage typed again. Your scanner transmitted identification protocols when it interfaced with workshop systems. I analyzed the data stream and cross-referenced with public records.
This is basic information processing, not advanced intelligence. Basic?
Walsh sat down heavily on Marcus's spare workstool. I have a degree in xenobiology, and I couldn't perform that kind of analysis without specialized software. Marcus felt a strange mix of pride and concern as he watched this exchange. Sage was proving his intelligence beyond any reasonable doubt, but, in doing so, he was also revealing capabilities that might make Station Authority nervous for entirely different reasons.
Inspector, Marcus said carefully, what would it take to officially register Sage as a business partner rather than property?
Walsh consulted her scanner again, but now she was looking at different sections of the regulatory database.
Partnership registration requires several things:
proof of voluntary agreement, demonstration of cognitive capacity, financial capability assessment, and. She paused, looking troubled.
A formal hearing before the station authority board. What's wrong with a hearing? Marcus asked.
Nothing, if this were a simple partnership registration. But, Mr. Chen, if what I'm seeing here is genuine, this has implications far beyond your workshop. Draknari have been classified as subsentient for over 2 centuries.
If that classification is wrong.
She didn't finish the sentence, but Marcus could fill in the blanks.
If dragons were sentient beings capable of legal partnership, then the entire galactic trade in dragons was built on slavery, not commerce.
The economic and legal ramifications would be staggering. Sage approached the inspector again and typed on her scanner's interface, "Inspector Walsh, I do not wish to cause galactic upheaval.
I only wish to work with Marcus Chen as an equal partner. Is this possible within existing legal frameworks?"
Walsh stared at the message for a long moment.
I think so.
But it would require very careful documentation.
And absolute discretion until the paperwork is processed. Discretion? Marcus asked.
Mr. Chen, if word of this gets out before it's officially documented, you'll have every dragon trader, collector, and broker in the sector trying to either steal your partner or discredit your claims. Not to mention the various governments and corporations that have significant investments in the current classification system. As if summoned by her words, Marcus's calm system chimed with an incoming priority message.
The display showed Grix Thornscale's agitated face. Shun.
Station authority is supposed to confiscate that dragon, not conduct social visits.
What kind of game are you playing?
Walsh looked from the calm to Marcus with sudden understanding.
This inspection wasn't routine, was it?
Grix filed a complaint trying to force me to sell Sage to his contacts, Marcus admitted. Walsh's expression hardened. Interference with an official investigation is a serious offense. Mr. Thornscale seems to have been monitoring my movements. She activated her calm and connected to station authority headquarters.
Dispatch, this is Inspector Walsh.
I need a secondary team to investigate potential harassment related to case 847.3 Delta. Suspect is attempting to influence official proceedings. While Walsh coordinated with headquarters, Sage approached Marcus and typed a message on the workbench terminal. Marcus, this situation is becoming dangerous. Perhaps it would be better if I left the station.
Marcus read the message and felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. No. We're going to do this right. If you want to be my business partner, then we'll make it official.
I'm not letting Grix or anyone else force you into a situation you don't want.
Sage's amber eyes seemed to brighten, and he typed again, why?
You could avoid all this trouble by simply selling me.
3 credits would become thousands.
Marcus considered the question seriously. 3 days ago, he would have said he was motivated purely by practical concerns. Sage was an excellent diagnostic technician and a valuable asset to the business. But, somewhere over the past few days, his feelings had evolved beyond mere professional appreciation. Because, Marcus said finally, everyone deserves the right to choose their own path. And, because you're not property, no matter what the classification system says. Inspector Walsh finished her call and rejoined their conversation. I've arranged for a priority hearing tomorrow morning. If we can document Sage's intelligence and voluntary participation, we should be able to process the partnership registration before anyone can interfere. She paused and looked directly at Sage.
I have to ask, are you certain you want to pursue this course of action?
Once you're registered as Marcus's business partner, there's no going back to being classified as property. You'll have legal rights, but also legal responsibilities. Sage moved to the terminal and typed carefully, Inspector Walsh, I have been intelligent my entire life. I have watched my people be bought and sold like equipment. I have seen dragons with engineering degrees forced to perform tricks for entertainment. I have known masters who were kind and masters who were cruel, but they were all masters. Marcus Chen is the first being who has ever asked what I want rather than what I can do.
Yes, I choose partnership. Walsh read the message twice, then made several notes in her official log. Very well.
I'm classifying this case as a priority partnership registration rather than a creature violation. Mr. Chen, Sage, I'll need both of you at Station Authority headquarters tomorrow at 0800 hours. After the inspector left, Marcus and Sage worked together on the Altarian drive core in comfortable silence. The routine maintenance tasks felt different now, less like a human directing an assistant and more like two professionals collaborating on a shared project. As evening approached, Marcus realized he was nervous about the hearing in ways that had nothing to do with legal technicalities. Somewhere over the past few days, Sage had become more than just a valuable workshop asset. The dragon had become a friend, perhaps the first real friend Marcus had made since arriving at Nexus Station. Sage, he said as they finished calibrating the drive core's power flow, what happens if they say no tomorrow? Sage considered the question seriously before typing his response. Then, I will have spent several days working as an equal with someone who treated me with respect.
That will have been worth the attempt.
Marcus smiled at that answer, but privately he was determined to ensure that Sage's optimism wasn't misplaced. He spent the evening reviewing partnership law and preparing documentation that would support their case. It was past midnight when Grix Thornscale made his next move. Marcus was awakened by the sound of his workshop's security system detecting unauthorized access attempts. He rolled out of his sleeping alcove to find Sage already alert, positioned where he could observe both the main entrance and the service hatch.
Multiple heat signatures, Sage typed quickly on the nearest terminal.
6 individuals, moving with tactical coordination. Marcus activated his workshop's external monitors and felt his blood run cold.
Grix had brought more than just the 2 Krell enforcers this time. A full extraction team was working on his door locks with professional-grade equipment. They're not here to talk, Marcus said grimly.
Sage moved to the workshop's communication panel and began typing rapidly. Within moments, he'd sent a priority alert to Inspector Walsh and Station Authority Emergency Services, complete with security footage of the break-in attempt. But help would take time to arrive, and the extraction team was already through the outer door. Marcus grabbed a plasma torch from his workbench, knowing it was inadequate against professional kidnappers but needing to feel like he could contribute something to their defense.
Sage, however, had moved to the Altarian drive core they'd been working on.
With swift, precise movements, he began adjusting the power flow controls.
"What are you doing?" Marcus asked. Sage's response appeared on the terminal, demonstrating why Draknari were once considered weapons of war. The workshop's lights dimmed as Sage redirected power from the station's grid through the drive core's amplification systems.
The air began to smell of ozone and electricity. The inner door began to buckle under the extraction team's tools. Sage positioned himself in the center of the workshop, wings spread wide for the first time since Marcus had known him. Even at his smaller size, the dragon's wingspan was impressive, and his scales had begun to glow with an internal light that Marcus had never seen before.
Last chance to reconsider, Sage typed quickly.
What I'm about to do will make it impossible to classify me as a simple maintenance tool. Marcus looked at his friend, his partner, this remarkable being who had chosen to trust him with the truth of dragon intelligence.
Do what you have to do.
The workshop door exploded inward, and 6 heavily armed figures rushed through the opening. They stopped dead when they saw Sage waiting for them. The dragon was no longer the quiet, submissive creature from the creature market. Power flowed through his scales like liquid lightning, his eyes blazed with controlled fire, and the air around him shimmered with barely contained energy. When Sage spoke, his voice was like controlled thunder, speaking perfect standard with an accent that suggested education and breeding that the creature markets had never advertised. "Gentlemen," Sage said calmly, "I believe you are trespassing." The extraction team froze like predators suddenly, realizing they had cornered something far more dangerous than expected. Their leader, a scarred Altarian mercenary with cybernetic implants, was the first to recover from the shock.
"Impossible," he breathed, raising his plasma rifle. "Dragons don't speak." "Dragons," Sage replied with perfect diction, "have been speaking for millennia. The question is whether anyone bothers to listen."
The mercenary's finger tightened on his weapon's trigger, but before he could fire, Sage moved. Not with the clumsy lumber that most beings expected from dragons, but with liquid grace that seemed to bend physics. One moment he was standing in the center of the workshop, the next he was beside the Eltarian, one claw delicately placed against the man's throat.
"I would prefer not to damage you," Sage said conversationally.
"But I should mention that my claws are currently channeling approximately 10,000 volts of electrical current.
Please ask your team to lower their weapons."
The mercenary's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on Sage's claw, no doubt analyzing the energy readings. Whatever it told him made his face go pale beneath his scars. "Stand down," he ordered his team through clenched teeth.
"All of you, weapons down."
Marcus watched in fascination as 5 heavily armed professionals obeyed without question. Whatever Sage was doing, it was convincing enough to make trained killers reconsider their career choices. "Much better," Sage said, stepping back but maintaining the electrical display that made his scales shimmer with contained lightning. "Now, I believe introductions are in order. I am Sage, recently of the creature markets and currently partner to Marcus Chen. You are trespassing in our place of business."
The Eltarian mercenary looked like he was rapidly recalculating the odds of mission success.
"We're here on behalf of Grix Thornscale. He has a legitimate purchase order for 1 dragon, previously acquired by Chun." "Fascinating," Sage mused.
"And did Mr. Thornscale perhaps mention that the dragon in question has already been registered as a business partner with Station Authority?"
This was a stretch of the truth, since the hearing hadn't happened yet, but the mercenary didn't need to know that. "That's impossible," one of the other team members said.
"Dragons can't enter legal partnerships."
Sage turned his glowing amber gaze on the speaker. "I find your certainty curious, given that you are currently in conversation with one who has done exactly that." The sound of approaching security forces echoed through the station corridors outside. Marcus felt some of his tension ease as he realized Inspector Walsh had received Sage's emergency transmission.
"I suggest," Sage continued calmly, "that you gentlemen reconsider your current course of action.
Station Authority takes a dim view of armed trespass, and I suspect they will be particularly interested in questioning anyone who attempts to kidnap a registered business entity." The extraction team's leader made a series of rapid hand signals, and his people began moving toward the workshop's emergency exits.
Professional kidnappers knew when a job had gone sideways beyond recovery.
"This isn't over," the Eltarian said as he backed toward the exit. "Thornscale has significant resources and political connections." "As do I," Sage replied with a slight smile that revealed teeth designed for more than just eating. "I look forward to testing them against his." As the mercenaries retreated, Station Authority security forces arrived in force. Inspector Walsh led the team, her scanner active and her expression grim with professional anger. "Assault, breaking and entering, attempted kidnapping," she said as her team detained the slower members of the extraction crew. "Mr. Thornscale has significantly escalated this situation." She looked at Sage, who was still glowing faintly with residual energy.
"I take it you handled the situation adequately?" "We reached an understanding," Sage said with admirable understatement. The electrical display around his scales faded, but Marcus noticed that the dragon's posture remained alert and ready. Walsh made notes in her official log while her security team processed the scene. "This incident actually strengthens your case for tomorrow's hearing.
Attempted kidnapping suggests that various parties have significant investment in maintaining the current classification system." Marcus watched the security forces work and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems.
"This is bigger than just Grix wanting to make a profit, isn't it?"
"Much bigger," Walsh confirmed.
"I've been making some discreet inquiries since this afternoon. The dragon trade involves millions of credits annually across dozens of systems.
If Draknari intelligence becomes legally recognized, it could trigger lawsuits, reparations claims, and regulatory investigations across half the galaxy." Sage approached Marcus and spoke quietly.
"I told you this was dangerous. It's not too late to withdraw our partnership application."
Marcus looked at his friend, this remarkable being who had revealed abilities and intelligence that challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about dragons. Then, he looked at the scorch marks on his workshop floor where the extraction team had tried to break down his door.
"No," Marcus said firmly. "We're going through with this."
Not just for us, but for every dragon sitting in a cage right now, waiting for someone to treat them like equipment instead of people.
Sage's amber eyes seemed to glow with something beyond electrical energy. Marcus, you should understand what you're committing to. If we succeed tomorrow, we won't just be business partners. We'll be the first officially recognized human-dragon partnership in galactic history. There will be consequences neither of us can predict.
Then, we'll face them together, Marcus replied.
Inspector Walsh finished her preliminary investigation and approached them both. I'm recommending that we move up your hearing to first thing tomorrow morning.
The longer we wait, the more time various interested parties have to organize opposition. She paused and looked directly at Sage. I should also inform you that I've sent preliminary reports to several xenobiology departments at major universities.
Your demonstration this evening has attracted some very high-level academic attention. Good or bad? Marcus asked.
Both, Walsh admitted. There are researchers who will be thrilled to study documented dragon intelligence. There are also those whose careers have been built on the current classification system. They won't welcome evidence that challenges decades of accepted theory. As the security teams finished processing the crime scene, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what they had stumbled into. This wasn't just about one dragon and one mechanic trying to work together. This was about challenging assumptions that underpinned major segments of galactic society. Sage, he said as they secured the workshop for what remained of the night, can I ask you something personal?
Of course. When you were in that cage at the market, did you know this would happen? Did you know I would be different? Sage considered the question seriously.
I knew you were different when you knelt down to meet my eyes instead of examining me like livestock. I knew you were different when you opened my cage and told me I was free to go. But I didn't know you would risk everything to defend my right to choose my own path. Marcus felt a strange warmth at those words. For what it's worth, I didn't know I was capable of it either. They worked together to repair the damage from the break-in, their movements synchronized by the comfortable familiarity they developed over the past few days. But both were aware that this might be their last night working together as unofficial partners.
Tomorrow's hearing would either legitimize their partnership or force them back into the legal categories that made Sage property and Marcus his owner. There would be no middle ground. As dawn approached over Nexus Station, word of the previous night's incident began to spread through the engineering community. Marcus's comm system chimed repeatedly with messages of support, warnings, and offers of assistance from fellow mechanics who had heard about the attack. But, mixed with the supportive messages were others that made Marcus's blood run cold. Anonymous threats, warnings that he was disrupting natural order, and offers to solve his dragon problem permanently. We've made enemies, Marcus said as he scrolled through the hostile messages. We've also made allies, Sage pointed out, highlighting messages from engineers across the station offering everything from legal support to workshop security. Look. Marcus read through the supportive messages with growing amazement. Engineers, technicians, and mechanics from dozens of species were rallying behind their partnership application. Many included their own stories of working with dragons who had displayed intelligence and problem-solving abilities far beyond what the classification system suggested. They'd been seeing it too, Marcus realized. Dragon intelligence. But nobody wanted to say anything because it would mean admitting they'd been complicit in slavery. Sage nodded gravely. My people have learned to hide our capabilities to avoid worse treatment. Better to be seen as valuable tools than as thinking beings who might object to our circumstances. As they prepared to leave for the hearing, Marcus felt the weight of representing more than just their own partnership. They were carrying the hopes of every dragon who had ever been forced to pretend to be less intelligent than they were, and every being who had suspected the truth but lacked the courage to challenge the system. Inspector Walsh arrived to escort them to Station Authority headquarters, her expression mixing determination with obvious nervousness. Ready? She asked. Marcus looked at Sage, who had assumed the alert, dignified posture that Marcus was learning to associate with the dragon's most serious moments. Ready, they said in unison. As they walked through the station corridors toward what would either be triumph or disaster, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since he'd paid 3 credits for what everyone assumed was defective merchandise. He'd discovered that the galaxy's understanding of dragon intelligence was fundamentally flawed,
that systematic slavery was being conducted under the guise of legitimate commerce, and that sometimes the most important revolutions began with simple acts of kindness. Most importantly, he discovered that friendship could transcend species boundaries when it was built on mutual respect rather than ownership. Whatever happened at the hearing, that discovery alone made everything else worthwhile. The station authority hearing chamber was packed beyond capacity. What should have been a routine partnership registration had become the most attended legal proceeding in Nexus Station's recent history. Representatives from major corporations, xenobiology researchers, dragon rights activists, and curious onlookers filled every available seat. Marcus sat at the petitioner's table with Sage beside him, trying to ignore the dozens of recording devices and the weight of so many stares. Across the chamber, Grix Thornscale occupied the opposition table with a team of expensive lawyers and what appeared to be several corporate representatives. The three-member hearing panel consisted of Station Commander Yalix, a veteran Centauri administrator, Dr. Sarah Chen, a human xenobiologist, and Magistrate Karath, a Vorthan legal expert whose scales remained neutral gray throughout the proceedings. Station Commander Yalix called the hearing to order with obvious reluctance. We are here to consider the partnership registration application filed by Marcus Chen, human engineer, and the entity identified as Sage, classification disputed. Grix's lead attorney, a sharp-featured Terran woman in expensive robes, immediately stood. Your Honor, we object to these proceedings on fundamental grounds. The entity in question is legally classified as subsentient property. It cannot enter into contracts, partnerships, or any other legal arrangement. Dr. Chan leaned forward with obvious interest. Before we proceed with legal arguments, I think it would be appropriate to hear from Sage directly. If he is indeed capable of legal partnership, he should be able to speak for himself. The chamber fell completely silent as all attention focused on Sage. The dragon rose from his seat with calm dignity and approached the speaker's podium. Honored panel, Sage began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic system. I thank you for this opportunity to address the question of my legal status. For the record, my full name is Sage Brightscale. I hold advanced degrees in mechanical engineering and quantum physics from the University of Drachnos Prime, and I have spent the past 15 years of my life being bought and sold as property. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Half the chamber erupted in shocked murmurs while the other half shouted accusations of fraud and deception. Commander Yalix was forced to call for order repeatedly before the hearing could continue. Dr. Chen's eyes were wide with scientific fascination. You claim to hold advanced degrees? From an accredited institution? I can provide transcripts and verification, Sage replied calmly. Though I suspect you'll find that my alma mater has no record of my existence. It's difficult to maintain alumni relations when you've been classified as livestock. Grix's attorney rose again. This is obviously a sophisticated deception. Advanced training can teach animals to mimic speech and even complex behaviors. We demand verification of these claims through independent testing. I welcome such testing, Sage said. But I should point out that the burden of proof traditionally falls on those who claim a thinking being is property, not on the being themselves to prove their personhood. Magistrate Karatha's scales flickered with interest. An astute legal observation. However, centuries of precedent have established Draknari classification. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Marcus stood up, his hands shaking slightly from nerves. Your Honors, if I may present evidence of Sage's capabilities? Commander Yalix nodded, and Marcus activated a holographic display that showed detailed schematics and repair logs from their workshop. These are diagnostic analyses and repair procedures completed by Sage over the past week. The complexity and accuracy of this work requires not just intelligence, but specialized education and years of experience. Dr. Chin examined the technical displays with growing excitement. These solutions are graduate-level engineering work. Some of these approaches are innovations I haven't seen before. Because, Sage said quietly, I developed them during my years working as equipment in various workshops. When you're not recognized as capable of innovation, your ideas are attributed to your owners. The implications of that statement rippled through the chamber. If dragons had been contributing to technological advancement while receiving no credit, how many innovations had been misattributed over the centuries?
Grix's attorney tried a different approach.
Even if we accept that this particular dragon has been trained to exceptional levels, that doesn't change its fundamental nature. Property is property, regardless of how valuable or well-educated it might be. Then, said a new voice from the back of the chamber, we have a problem. Everyone turned to see a figure approaching through the crowd. It was another dragon, larger than Sage, with scales that shifted from deep blue to silver. This dragon wore academic robes and carried credentials that identified him as Dr. Flame Goldscale, Professor Emeritus of Interspecies Law from the Galactic University.
Honored panel, Dr. Goldscale said formally, I request permission to address this hearing as an expert witness.
The sight of a second articulate dragon sent fresh shockwaves through the chamber.
Commander Yalix looked like he was developing a headache. Dr. Goldscale? You hold a legal degree?
Several, actually. I also serve as legal counsel for the Draknari Liberation Front, an organization that has been working within legal channels to address our species classification status for over 50 years.
Grix's attorney paled. This is impossible. Our intelligence sources would have detected organized dragon resistance movements. Dr. Goldscale's expression held what might have been amusement. Madam, we dragons have been hiding in plain sight for centuries. When the law declares you property, legal resistance requires considerable creativity.
He activated his own holographic display, showing documents that made several corporate representatives in the audience visibly nervous.
I present to the panel documented evidence of Draknari intellectual contributions to galactic civilization.
Patents filed under false names by dragon owners who claimed credit for our innovations. Technological breakthroughs developed in corporate workshops by dragon equipment.
Scientific discoveries made by dragons working as research animals.
The scale of the evidence was staggering. Hundreds of innovations across multiple industries, all traceable to dragon minds working behind the facade of property ownership.
Dr. Chen was frantically taking notes. This represents the greatest case of scientific plagiarism in galactic history. Plagiarism implies intent to deceive, Dr. Goldscale replied. This is systematic theft of intellectual property on an unprecedented scale.
Magistrate Karatha's scales had shifted to alarmed patterns.
Dr. Goldscale, if your organization has evidence of widespread legal violations, why haven't you filed formal complaints? Honored Magistrate, how does property file complaints about theft?
Until dragons are recognized as legal entities capable of owning intellectual property, we have no standing to challenge the appropriation of our ideas. The circular nature of the legal trap was now clear to everyone present.
Dragons couldn't challenge the system because the system didn't recognize them as capable of challenging it.
Commander Yalix called a recess to allow the panel to consult privately. As the chamber buzzed with heated discussions, Marcus found himself surrounded by reporters, activists, and corporate representatives all demanding statements. Sage remained calm in the center of the chaos, answering questions with patient professionalism that contrasted sharply with the emotional reactions around him.
Mr. Sage, called out a reporter from the Galactic News Network, what do you want to happen as a result of this hearing? I want the same thing every thinking being wants, Sage replied. The right to determine my own path in life. The right to be recognized for my contributions. The right to form relationships based on mutual respect rather than legal ownership. And, if the panel rules against you? Sage glanced at Marcus, then, back at the reporter. Then, I will have spent several days working as an equal partner with someone who saw me as a person rather than property. That experience has been worth any risk.
When the hearing reconvened, the panel's expressions suggested they had reached a decision that satisfied no one completely.
Commander Yalix spoke for the group.
After careful consideration of the evidence and arguments presented, this panel finds that the entity known as Sage has demonstrated cognitive abilities and legal understanding sufficient for partnership registration.
The chamber erupted in celebration from some quarters and outrage from others. However, Yalix continued loudly, we recognize that this decision has implications far beyond this individual case. Therefore, we are referring the broader question of Draknari classification to the Galactic Council for formal review.
It was a compromise that gave Marcus and Sage what they wanted while acknowledging that the systemic issues couldn't be resolved at the station level. Grix stormed out of the chamber with his legal team, but not before making it clear that this decision would be appealed through every available legal channel. As the crowd began to disperse, Dr. Goldscale approached Marcus and Sage. "Congratulations on your victory. It's a small step, but an important precedent. What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now," Dr. Goldscale said with satisfaction, "we prepare for a much larger fight. The Galactic Council hearing will determine not just dragon rights, but the future of interspecies law across the galaxy." In the weeks that followed, Marcus and Sage's workshop became an unofficial headquarters for what the media dubbed the Dragon Rights Movement. Engineers from across the station brought their dragon equipment for consultations that were really opportunities for dragons to speak freely about their experiences. The stories that emerged painted a picture of systematic oppression that had hidden in plain sight for centuries. Dragons with advanced degrees forced to perform menial tasks. Dragon inventors whose innovations were credited to their owners. Dragon philosophers and artists whose works were attributed to other species. But there were also stories of hope. Dragons who had found ways to pursue their interests despite legal constraints. Dragons who had formed underground networks to share knowledge and support each other. Dragons who had been quietly working toward the day when they might be recognized as equals. Marcus found his workshop producing innovations at a rate that attracted attention from major corporations and research institutions. The partnership between human mechanical expertise and dragon theoretical knowledge proved to be remarkably productive. More importantly, their relationship had evolved beyond simple professional collaboration. Sage had become the friend Marcus had never realized he needed, someone whose different perspective challenged his assumptions and whose steady wisdom provided stability during the chaos of galactic attention. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked one evening as they worked together on a particularly challenging quantum engine modification. "Regret what?" "Revealing the truth. Things would have been simpler if you'd stayed quiet." Sage considered the question while calibrating a power coupling with microscopic precision. "Marcus, I spent 15 years pretending to be less than I was to avoid worse treatment. Those were not years I lived, they were years I survived. These past months, working as your equal partner, facing challenges together, building something meaningful, this is the first time in my adult life that I have truly been alive." Marcus smiled at that answer. "Then, it was worth it?" "Every moment of it." As they continued their work, news feeds from around the galaxy brought updates on the expanding dragon rights movement. Liberation groups were emerging on dozens of worlds. Universities were scrambling to address the implications of centuries of misattributed research. Corporations were quietly negotiating with dragon employees to avoid massive intellectual property lawsuits. The galaxy was changing, slowly but inevitably, as the truth about dragon intelligence became impossible to deny. And, in a cluttered workshop on Nexus Station, a human mechanic and a dragon engineer continued their partnership, proving every day that mutual respect could bridge any gap between species. The weak dragon had turned out to be anything but weak. And the 3 credits Marcus had paid for him had purchased something far more valuable than he had ever imagined. They had purchased a future where friendship mattered more than ownership, where intelligence was recognized regardless of its source, and where the simple act of kneeling instead of commanding could change the course of galactic history. In the end, that had been worth every credit, every risk, and every challenge they had faced together.